They say they're going to be there for the people most in need, like the $1,000 an hour consultants over at McKinsey, a company that received over $100 million for work that public servants say was of little or no value. The total amount this government is spending on high-priced consultants, $15 billion. That is $1,000 for every single family in Canada. Wow. No wonder Canadians are eating increasingly at food banks after 8 years of this government. No wonder seniors can't keep the heat on. Why won't they give us an answer? How much did McKinsey get in total?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, and I remember in my time in opposition looking at the member opposite who sat in a government that had a poverty rate of 14.5%. And you know how often they talked about poverty or people in food banks? Never. And in fact, what has happened under this government is that rate has been reduced by 56%. We have lifted literally over 1.5 million people out of poverty. And I would point out that under the worst period of growth since 1946, which his government presided over, that this government in turn has seen more than 1.5 million jobs created since they left office.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, there they go, telling Canadians, stop all your complaining. You've never had it so good. If you're one of the 1.5 million people eating at a food bank, stop your complaining. You've never had it so good. If you're one of those people seeking help with suicide, which is becoming increasingly common, they tell you, you've never had it so good. If you're one of the 35-year-olds living in your parents' basement because this government's policies have doubled rent and doubled mortgage payments, they tell you, you've never had it so good. Why? Because they're spending all their time with McKinsey consultants. How much did those consultants get from taxpayers?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, when the world is going through something incredibly difficult, you have a choice of what you can do. You can look them in the eyes and tell them straight that they're in the most difficult time that humanity has gone through since the Second World War, or you can retweet what's going wrong in the world and make YouTube videos. It's time for serious leadership. And you know what's happened over the last 8 years? Every time we put concrete solutions in place, the party opposite has obfuscated. They tried to block on support for dental, on support for rental, on support for childcare, on support for OAS, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And now their second tactic. First, they tell Canadians they've never had it so good. Now they admit that it's miserable, but it's everyone else's fault. The rest of the world did not raise the rent in Canada. Rental rates are set here. We don't import our apartment buildings from Russia. We build them here in Canada. We don't set mortgage rates in Russia. We set them here in Canada. And after $500 billion of inflationary deficits bidding up goods and constant red tape preventing the construction of the homes we need, our young people are stuck in their parents' basements. Why don't they stop blaming everyone else and finally take responsibility for the misery they've caused?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite had an opportunity to be in government and to do something on poverty. They didn't have any targets. They didn't talk about poverty. They didn't talk about homeless shelters. They didn't move those at all. And I've talked about what this government has done. But the IMF is now saying Canada will have the second highest GDP growth in the world. And the reality is that as we work hard to lift Canadians up and do critical things like childcare and dental care, instead of just amplifying anxiety and fear, why won't they be part of the solution? And I would say, Mr. Speaker, they haven't been in this House. All they've done is block and obstruct real solutions.
I just want to direct all the members to look at their whips and seek advice from them in their signals. They're going like this to calm down and not shout out. So I just want to remind everyone, their whip is working very hard and the deputy whip is too. Listen to them. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Now, their third tactic. First, they say everything's great. Then they say it's terrible, but it's everyone else's fault. Then they say we should stop talking about how miserable people's lives are. He seems to suggest that people are anxious because I'm telling them that they can't afford food. No, their stomachs are telling them that they can't afford food. They seem to think that if I stop talking about the fact seniors in Northern Ontario can't heat their homes because of the carbon tax, that seniors won't notice that they're cold. They seem to think that if I don't talk about the 35-year-old living in his parents' basement, he won't realize that he's living there. Mr. Speaker, why don't they fix the problems instead of telling people to shut up about them?
Mr. Speaker, we are plain and straight about the difficult times that we're going through as a planet. And I would suggest this is a party, Mr. Speaker, that at every opportunity is actually not offering any solutions, and in fact ignoring the fact that when they had a chance to act on poverty, when they had a chance to act on creating jobs, they had such a bad record on GDP. There was 14 times in history where there was more growth in a single year than they had in their entire government.
Time and time again, we see Liberal cabinet ministers breaking ethics laws to help their friends and Liberal insiders. The Liberals will funnel money and lucrative contracts to them. They'll take illegal vacations. They'll even interfere in the criminal prosecution to help out their friends. And after 8 years under this Prime Minister, well, Canadians have never had it so bad. Liberal insiders, friends, and high-priced consultants have never had it so good. So when will they stop the corruption and start putting the needs of Canadians first?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, saying that Canadians have never had it worse is an absolutely ludicrous statement. There have been all kinds of instances in history where Canadians have faced hard times and dealt with difficult situations, whether or not it was in great wars or in difficult economic storms that took the world. Canadians rose to those occasions and met them with strength and determination to build a stronger future thereafter. And the notion, as Canadians are facing anxiety as they're looking at global tumult, that they should think that they are the worst position they've ever been is just simply irresponsible, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, throughout history and up until this point, governments were there for their people when they were facing hard times, but not these Liberals. They're there for insiders. The Prime Minister who helped his buddies get off criminal charges. The Prime Minister who took an illegal vacation. The Intergovernmental Affairs Minister who gave lucrative contracts to family members. And the Prime Minister's hand-picked Finance Minister who tried to give $500 million to we, and the Trade Minister who, of course, just gave tens of thousands of dollars to her bestie. Canadians are lined up at food banks. Liberal insiders are lined up to get rich. What's it going to take for one of these corrupt ministers to resign?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask that we all watch the language that we use, and I'd be interested to see if the member opposite would use a term like that outside of the chamber. This chamber should be met with the same decorum inside as out. And Mr. Speaker, the party opposite had the opportunity for 10 years to care about the issues that they're now talking about. And I would ask them, if they said they were there, where were they for that 1.5 million Canadians who now have jobs that didn't under their government? Where were they for over 1 million individuals who were in poverty and who were suffering when they were in government and never talked about poverty, Mr. Speaker? It's a little bit rich, and I think they should reflect on their rhetoric.